Okay, I think we're ready to go.
All right, it is 6:07 and I call this May 7th meeting of the Equity Board to order. And with that, we are doing probably roll call.
Roll call, indeed. For new members, I'll say your name and you just say if you're here. And then for our excused absences, I'll let us know who's excused at the end. And then if I pronounce your name incorrectly, just correct me. So starting with folks in the room, Oscar Montano. Here. Varnika Doka.
Here.
Kwan Palmer.
Here.
Priti Modi Pan.
Here.
Karthik Kashina.
Here.
Leslie Melinda Irwin is currently absent. Lorna Gilmore.
Here.
Kelly Munn has an excused absence. Oh, Chris Ziade.
Here.
And Nisha Nair.
Here.
Heather Youngs.
Here.
And Kunal, last but certainly not least.
Here.
Excellent. We have quorum and we can proceed.
Great. Okay, then I think we are ready for public comment. And first up, we have Deputy Council President Dee Michelle.
Thank you so much. And I'll try, is there a 5-minute limit on public comment?
Feel free.
I'll do my best. So I am Barb Dee Michelle, Deputy Council President, and this is the time of the year that the council and the mayor come out to our boards and commissions to say thank you to the people who have already served and say welcome to the new members. So can I just ask who's new to the Equity Board this time? Well, welcome, and I see you online as well. So welcome. We so appreciate your being willing to step up and be involved in your community, and we hope this is a really good experience for you. And I think it says something, this wonderful turnout of the board. So when I first came in the room, I said this is a really important board, and I didn't mean that, to be an exaggeration. This really is a very important board, and there's a couple of things I want to mention that you've done, and then a little bit of a preview of what I think is coming down the pike. So first of all, I want to talk about the equity calendar. We are so proud. We brag about that all the time. I think we're now into the 3rd year of using that calendar, and it is proving to be absolutely wonderful. The way that we're able to acknowledge so many different holidays and celebrations and maintain going forward as a community. And so we've proved, a lot of people said it couldn't be done. We've proved that it can be done. And that was the work that this board did so well and so thoughtfully that it has been a beautiful thing for us. And the other thing I just want to say is that over the past couple of years, I've really noticed that people are coming more and more to the equity board to get the equity lens. And that is exactly what the council when we initiated this group. We wanted to be sure that everything we did went through an equity lens. And I'm seeing that is developing over time, and people are coming to you more and more. That means they respect your opinions, and also that equity lens is becoming just part of our culture. And that's so important. So then this morning, Mayor Polly and I held a convening of 17 nonprofits in the area. And these are nonprofits that provide human services to our community. And as you might imagine, it was pretty heavy listening. People are losing grants. They're not being reimbursed for expenses that they've already done. They're seeing a much higher demand and lower resources. And so it was a pretty heavy thing. And so as we're going forward into this next year, this group, I think, is going to be instrumental in making sure that these tough decisions that we're facing, this really hard time that's coming down the pike, Mayor Polly described it as a human services crisis, is coming down the pike at us. And so I don't want to be a downer, but I mean, this is the reality of what is happening around us. And I see this group as just being instrumental in being sure that the council, the mayor, all of us are looking at the decisions that we have to make and making sure that they are done equitably and fairly. So I can't thank you enough for the thoughtfulness and the passion that you bring to this board. And I wish you well. And again, welcome to the new people. Thank you for stepping up.
Thank you.
I think that's what I'm going to say. Can you think of anything else I need to add?
No, that was excellent.
Oh, good, I looked to Dale first. All right, so I did not want to disrupt this meeting, so I'm going to head out, but again, thank you so much for everything you do. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Hello, nice to see you.
Okay, and I think up next we have our friends from the Baha'is with some public comments.
Thank you very much. There is a good place for me to.
I think take that corner seat. Yeah, pull up a chair.
So, yeah, for those that may not know, we've been doing this community building social, which is even though it's hosted by the Baha'i communities, but it is for everyone. It is not for just the Baha'is, it's for everyone. And this time it's going to be a little bit different. Usually we invite someone who has been very active in the path of service to the community. This time we decided to have a conversation, and the conversation is about the place of spirituality in community building. And you know, spirituality is defined in many ways, and there are many quote unquote sources of spirituality. Some people, their yoga exercise is their source of spirituality, or the way they focus on their breath, or the way they walk in the forest, or the classical religious form of spirituality in a church, in a synagogue, in a mosque, or a temple. But regardless of where we find that and where we draw from that spirituality, the thing that we want to explore, all of us together, is, does it have a place in community building? I mean, creating connection among people. So it's not going to have a speaker, it's going to have two facilitators, and hopefully everyone can give us the benefit of their thought and their feelings. May I have some of those invitations? Hopefully, pass it around. Yes. I don't know how many I need, but.
I would say give us as many as you're willing to give.
Oh, yes.
And feel free to take
Many.
extras and share them.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So this is a chance for everybody to talk with each other, like it's just a sharing and learning from each other about something that's probably near and dear to everybody in their own personals, their own way. But we all kind of feel that spirituality has a role. It contributes in some mystical or some, any number of ways to our wanting to help other people, community building and service and stuff like that. So it's I think, going to be a really exciting kind of creative conversation, followed by some food and dinner together, like we do at these community building sessions. So share with others too, and invite anybody you'd like. We're inviting everybody who have been speakers in the past, like from the garage, from the food bank, from the network, and Barbie Michelle has been there 2 or 3 times. I know she'll probably be there. And I'll bring everybody, each of you, bring your thoughts and ideas about this. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay, so next up, just to give you all a preview of what's happening. So we're going through our agenda. And so the next item is approval of minutes. And then after that, we'll hold a little bit of time for some introductions for everyone as part of our get to know you in terms of the opening question. So just one moment to get through some of the other process steps of the agenda. And so the next item is approval of minutes. And we have 2 sets of minutes in the packet. And so the first set was from our March meeting. Second set is from our April meeting, which was a joint meeting with the environmental board. So I'll maybe give you a couple of minutes to do a scan. And then after that, I'd like a call for approving the minutes. And then we can have a brief discussion if anyone has any changes, questions, or addendums to it. Okay. All right, and when someone is ready, could you make a motion to approve?
I'll make an emotion.
Okay. And we need a second. Okay. Anyone seconding? I'll second. Okay. And then, do you folks have any questions, comments, or edits to make to, let's start with the March, I guess. Yeah. All right. No changes or edits. All right, then I think we can consider those approved.
Yeah.
Okay, and could I get a motion to approve the April meeting minutes? Okay, and then a second?
Second.
A second, okay. Any changes, addendums, or corrections?
There's one tiny typo. Usually I rely upon you to find all my typos. There's one tiny typo in item B under regular business. The word projects in the first line should be presenters. I will make that tiny edit.
Thank you, Dale. Okay, and not hearing any changes or discussion needed, I think we can consider the April minutes approved. All right. So, okay, next up on our agenda is the chair report and opening question. And just for context and for our new members, we have an opening question. It's been a new practice, well, no longer new, but a practice that the Equity Board started probably a couple of years ago. And I think, I like to think it's for two reasons. One is that I think in order to have like candid conversations and open dialogue, it's nice that we take a few minutes at the start of meetings to get to know each other. And then the second reason for this is to get everyone's voice into the room. And I think, once someone speaks up in the meeting, it's easier for them to speak up again and again and again. So those are the two reasons. And so with that, I think as by way of introduction and us getting to know each other, so I have like two related prompts. And so the two prompts are, what compelled you to apply to the Equity Board? And for maybe our continuing members, if that's been a while, what continues to keep you engaged and want to be on the Equity Board? And so, yeah, and we usually start off, someone goes first and then just popcorns it to the next person until everyone's gone. And so if you can all, say your name, your preferred pronouns, and the response to the prompts, and we'll take a few minutes to cover everyone in the room. So who would like to go first? Awesome.
Hi, everyone, my name is Conor Boston. I'm a junior at Skyline High School, and I'm one of the youth representatives for this board. And I'll just answer both questions. So I was first interested in the equity board because I'm also on the Issaquah Youth Advisory Board, and I heard about the opportunity through that and thought it sounded interesting and another way I can make an impact. And then since then, one of the main things that appeals me about this board is just like the collaboration we have with other boards and and the knowledge I've gained from that. And so like every meeting I'm learning something cool about like cybersecurity or like natural disasters, cool stuff like that. And I think for the new members, you're gonna find that interesting as well. You wanna go next?
Sure, yeah, thanks. I think I've been on the board for about a year now, almost 2 years now. Joined the equity board because I was interested in just understanding a bit more about how sort of listening to various different perspectives can be brought into action in our community. And still the equity board, I'm very much interested in this work because I'm discovering just so many more layers to it and how it's at the core of so much of what we do. Yeah. On to Oscar.
Hi, I am Oscar Montano, a new member. I work at Costco's corporate office as an e-com depot operations supervisor. What compelled me to join the board was just the wanting to give a different perspective, at least my perspective, coming from Hispanic background, being raised in Southern California where the Hispanics are the majority.
Yeah.
And then moving up to Washington like 4 years ago and suddenly becoming more of a minority. So just hoping to give as much feedback as I can from the Hispanic point of view.
You pass it to someone else.
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, so hi everyone, new board member also, Chris Ziede, or Christopher, but I go by Chris. I also work at Costco Corporate. I work in change management, which is part of HR, focused on people's side of change. So always had a passion for helping people, even at work, and grew up in Lebanon, then moved to California, Southern California for about 6 years before moving up here. And I've always done stuff that's part of the community, however that looks. And more recently with Costco, I was working on the DEI initiatives, and I kind of wanted to be more involved in the community aspect of it too, which is what prompted me to kind of apply to join here, because I was like, oh, you could do so much and I could learn so much at the same time. So that was kind of what brought me here. Yeah, that's the moment to you.
Okay, Preeti Modi Pan, I use she, her pronouns, and as I was saying to some folks in the room that I'm one of the few remaining folks who have been part of the beginning of the equity board, but which was 2021. And I'll just say what continues to keep me engaged, especially now, is that I feel at the federal level, things are not looking very positive in terms of making progress on equity, social justice, diversity, inclusion, just all of those things. And so I think it's so important for the role of community and local governments to hold down the fort so we don't backslide. And I just think it's important that we don't lose sight of those issues right now.
Lorna Gilmore, she, her pronouns, like Preeti. I'm also a part of the original group. What brought me in was, like, as Chris said in his work, he saw the need for equity and has been happy to work in that and wanted to expand that. And in my work as a teacher working in equity in our district, I saw that the students were saying, thank you for doing this work for our students in a school community, but what about outside? Who's helping us in the community when people are calling us names, when we are feeling the racism in stores, in our neighborhoods? And that led me to work with a community group that was having conversations about racism, about inequities, about hate, about prejudice. And when this group was formed, I was happy to join this group to support the city in systemic ways to make changes to support our community, because it is, you have to go systemically and you just can't make, like changes, it doesn't work. So making sure we're addressing root, making sure that we have systems in place to support our community members, all community members, to lift them up. And so it's also making sure people understand the difference between equity versus equality. And that has been one of the main things that I've seen our work do in helping people understand that. And so I've been proud of the work in this group and happy to continue as long as I feel like I can make the difference in this group, with this group. Thank you.
Quan. My name is Quan Palmer, she, her pronouns. Similar to Lorna and Chris, I've worked in HR for 10 years. And I've worked in public sector, I've worked in tech sector. And I think that something that really compelled me first, I really love living in Issaquah, so that's one. I love the community, I love my neighbors. But when you work in an organization, you can only make internal impact. You can't make I think a lot of people who work in HR want to help people, want to be able to make changes and assess, unfortunately, it only stays within the organization. So I was looking for something that would impact externally with direct communities. I want to do more. For a long time, I wanted to do like volunteer work or like some big impact, but I didn't know where to start. And I feel like this is a good spot just because I have a lot of background in DEI stuff, equity, and you know, also being a female minority in a workplace, you have a lot of different lenses.
Hi, I'm Veronica. She, her pronouns. I'm currently a freshman at UW, and I think what's continuously engaging me on this board is just the different amount of topics that we can bring an equity lens to. Like from being on this board for about like 2 years, I've learned there's equity lens to like transportation all the way to like so many different topics like natural disasters and all that stuff, which has been really interesting to learn about. And being a youth member, I really want to bring a youth perspective to this board that's filled with adults, but I've also had the opportunity to learn so much more from all the other board members. So I'm really happy to be on this board and the vast amount of opportunities that it's given. But
So I'm not a board member. I'm Jillian. I'm not quite sure what question I should.
Oh,
Well, maybe as someone who's about to become a liaison for a short period of time,
Oh yeah,
talk about why that's exciting.
Yeah, okay. So hi everyone, I'm Jillian. I'm a management analyst in the executive office for Issaquah. And I'll be serving as your board liaison while Dale is out for summer mostly. And I've served in roles like that before at different cities that I've worked at, and I really enjoyed working with community members directly who are also really engaged in the work of bettering their community. Like that's why I got into public service. So it's exciting to work with people who are also mission driven in that way.
Let's kick it to our 2 members online, and then I'll close this out. So maybe Heather and then Nisha.
Hey guys, yeah, despite what it says on the screen, yeah, I'm Heather Youngs, live in the Issaquah community. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, work a lot with like trauma and OCD, and I have a pretty diverse array of clients. So what brought me to the board, honestly, was really wanting to kind of, I guess, expand the reach of being able to promote like equity and diversity in our community. And also with the recent political climate, I guess I felt driven to take action in a healthily fighty kind of way. So
Awesome.
excited to learn more about it.
Thanks, Heather.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nisha. I am she, her pronouns as well. I use she, her pronouns. I wanted to join this board because in my career, I've primarily done work on behalf of children. And I think that if you're going to build a community with equity, start at the bottom and work your way up. And so I wanted to make sure that I contributed to a community that's working towards common goals, which I think my goals are in line with those, and that we also consider the voices of kids in what we're doing to help shape their views of social justice and equity. So that's why I joined the board.
Thank you. And then Dale, do you want to close this out and then jump into the next?
Yes, I'll close this out and then we'll jump into our regular business. Dale Murphy-Crimp, I use she, her pronouns. I am the assistant to the city administrator here at the city of Issaquah, and I've been the board liaison for a little, over 2 years now, maybe a year and a half. It's hard to tell. Time is but a flat circle. And I would say, similar to Lorna, my background is in K-12 education. I was a middle school English teacher, and through that experience became deeply convicted about the importance of equity in all facets of our society, and within all of our systems, needing to really rethink the structures that exist, to call out the barriers and the harm that they're causing, and to think about how we can rethink and reimagine and transform those systems. And so when I came to local government, the opportunity was not immediately here for me to work with this board, but when the opportunity arose for me to take over the liaison role for this particular board, I was thrilled to be able to step into that role and to get to work with this group that I think is really pushing our organization to think differently. And as Deputy Council President shared, has been creating and collaborating on really incredible tools for our staff and for our community to really change the way we provide service, the way we think about our service, and the way we communicate and interact with each other internally and externally at the city. So just feeling lucky to be here.
On to the staff reports.
Staff report will be quite brief. At our last meeting, we had two presenters from King County Floodplain Management that came and presented both to this board and to the environmental board. They were here with us. Specifically, their ask of this group was for organizations, individuals to reach out to about their upcoming floodplain management process and survey. This group and the environmental board shared a number of organizations and individuals with them. They literally just emailed me today with their list. They're like, here's who we're planning to reach out to. So I will send that out to the whole board for you all to take a look at. And if there's anything you feel like is missing from that group, just email me back and we'll add that to them. They also sent a very nice card in the mail, just thanking you for your time, which I'll take a screenshot of and send that out in the email as well. So that is the update from our most recent meeting.
Okay, thank you. And so next up on the agenda is the Evans Consulting Group presentation. And Jillian, would you like to set it up?
Yeah, absolutely. So with us today, we have several members from the Evans School of Public Policy. And we've contracted with them to conduct an equity assessment of our boards and commissions. So they're here to present their preliminary findings. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the backstory to this project. I also want to note that we have Andrea Snyder, Deputy City Administrator, on the line, who's been quite involved in this work, can provide context and answer questions as needed as well. So with that,
before we jump in, my team on the phone, can you guys hear us? And can we check and see if we can hear you?
I can hear.
Yep. Testing. Can you hear our audio?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great.
And we're sharing one mic. Can you hear all of us?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Can you hear
thank
me
you.
as well?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Oh, wow.
Golden. All right.
That's some technology. Okay.
Yeah, we're really broadening our tech tonight. So with that, I'll let Jillian jump in.
okay, so like I mentioned, we're here today to receive your feedback. Okay, we're here to receive your feedback on the draft recommendations for diversity, equity, inclusion, and Issaquah's boards and commissions. This is situated in a larger project as well. This is just one portion or one topic area that we know we need to explore and identify improvements to. So they'll go into a little bit more about what they did, and I can also situate it in the larger project as well. But we did want to preview here for you the policy questions that we'll be asking you, so that you can consider these as they present their recommendations. So first, are there any significant gaps that you see in the recommendations? And second, we'd like your help in prioritizing these actions, knowing that we can't do everything at once. What's most urgent? What's some low-hanging fruit? Where do you think administration should dive in once we move into the implementation phases of this plan? Okay, so like I said, this is situated in a larger project. So the city of Issaquah has been engaged in equity work in one way or another for many years. Part of that work is the creation of this board itself. And like Council President or Deputy Council President Dee Michelle mentioned, some of the work with the religious and cultural holidays calendar, the equity framework, and other items like that. So there's been motion on this for a long time, but the community, this board, and the strategic plan update task force in 2024 all noted the need for more strategic action on this to help us all get aligned with where we're going on equity. So where we see the first stage of this larger project being is some goal setting with community members and leadership to understand what does Issaquah think, what does Issaquah think equity is, where we need to be. The second stage of that is a gaps analysis to understand here are our current policies, practices, programs as a city. How are we meeting that shared vision that we've established? And then creating a plan, a way to implement it. Issaquah has a lot of operational or functional plans, but we don't have one for equity. So creating a roadmap for us to follow and track progress too. So that's a short version of what that larger project is going to be. The work with the Evans School focuses on one portion of that with the boards and commissions. We felt that this is a place where it was pretty clear where the city needs to go in terms of representation. So we could move forward into that kind of gaps analysis and make forward progress without waiting for that larger project, which is underway in 2025. So I can also speak more to that if there are questions about it. But with that, I'll hand it over to the Evans School for the bulk of this presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you all. We're really happy to be here. I'm Sarah. You're going to hear from me as well as from my colleagues on the phone. Just to set some quick expectations, you're going to see a lot of information on the slides. We're going to be talking about a lot. There's even more that we did in our research. So there'll be time for some questions and discussion between sections, and we can go back to any slides at the end. So I just ask for your grace and patience because we'll be getting through a lot in the next 20 to 30 minutes. So as Julian mentioned, we really focused in very directly on the boards and commissions and just do a little bit of thinking about what equity might look like in those spaces. So we focused really specifically around things like demographic composition. So who's on the boards now, and are those demographics representative of the broader city of Issaquah? Recruitment, how do folks hear about boards? Why do they join? Why don't they join? Retention, once people are on the boards, why do they stay for years like Preeti and Warna? Why might they not be able to? What are their expectations while they serve on this board? Lastly, thinking about governance. So how do the boards operate? What mechanisms are in place to ensure everyone's voices are heard and valued? When and where is equity considered as part of the recommendations, for example. So our methodology involved a literature review, some data analysis on applicant demographics in comparison to the census and using GIS data. We did a whole slew of interviews, including a bunch with board and commission members, some of you all here, as well as other boards around Issaquah, some staff and liaisons from Issaquah, as well as some staff from 9 other jurisdictions to get a sense a little bit of how other cities might be thinking about this. We did a bit of a gap analysis to find areas where things were going really well and areas where there might be opportunities. And then we've created some recommendations, primarily based on the literature review, what we heard was successful or being pursued in other cities or on different Issaquah boards. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit for a moment about how we're thinking about framing our findings today. So there's some kind of fundamental positions we took from our research. Public meetings, as I'm sure we know, are a key part of the democratic process. Boards and commissions, as we've already talked about a little bit tonight, are really critical way that local governments engage their citizens and understand their community interests. To ensure all members of the community are heard equally and that diverse viewpoints are considered, it's really necessary to ensure boards and commissions are representative of that community and they operate with equity in mind. So we found, probably unsurprisingly, that representation on boards matters. But to be effective, it requires folding in practices that uphold diversity and ensure inclusion, creating spaces where everyone feels safe, valued, engaged, and fully themselves. So we found that policies and practices supporting diversity really elevate the effectiveness of having diverse representation. We also found that diverse representation and inclusive practices are necessary to ensure boards and commissions can operate with equitable principles. So in talking to board representatives and staff, we found that board experience plays a large part in that inclusion piece. So people described recruitment processes, how they're onboarded, trainings they receive, expectations of their role, and how their voices are called in to participate in discussions. And from that, we've framed our presentation kind of around these 2 areas, one around recruitment, which we believe aids in diverse representation, and board practices and experience, which we believe lead to a sense of inclusion. So we'll talk about our findings and recommendations in each of these areas with a pause in between for some discussion, questions, etc. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Maury to speak a little bit more specifically on our findings around that recruitment and diversity piece.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, the literature review really surfaced what diversity is and what it can or cannot do at the advisory board level. Recruitment was then identified and affirmed as the mechanism for how we are obtaining diversity represented advisory boards. So this section that we're about to talk about is really framing how these concepts of recruitment and diversity are showing up right now across Issaquah's boards and commissions. And this is going to ground the recommendations we'll go over at the end of the section. Sarah, you can go ahead and click the first 2.
Yes, sorry, my,
No
there we go. It just has a delay.
No worries. So the first two findings here on this slide are related to the power and the purpose of diversity. Firstly, the literature suggests that when a certain threshold of diversity is obtained, it can lead to better outcomes and innovation. So this was something affirmed in the literature. Secondly, the literature framed that diverse representation is an essential component for interrupting historical barriers, such as aspects of white supremacy culture that have permeated our public institutions in the United States. Some of these attributes that are being interrupted by diverse groups might include how we tend to operate under rigidness of time, or how we push a grind and grit mentality onto folks. So then you'll see these final points on the slide articulate how advisory boards can approach obtaining diverse membership through their recruitment practices. The third point on the screen, the literature really frames that a diverse array of candidates will be more inclined to serve on boards when they're provided with an opportunity to both build capacity and participate in meaningful work. Related to the fourth point on the slide, boards are likely to become more diverse when the recruitment strategies to obtain them are broadly inviting of both self-recruiting and nominated candidates. So in other words, what I mean by that is it's important to recruit members who are seeking opportunities on their own accord. It's also important to specifically invite certain candidates to apply through nominations from other board members or from city officials. From our interviews, the city of Issaquah is currently doing this pretty well with strong balance. So was encouraging to hear. And with that, I'll pass it to Jordan.
Thanks, Maury. I will be presenting our findings related to representation and recruitment, starting with our analysis of the geographic representation of Issaquah's boards. We compared the percentage of members on the boards and commissions from each neighborhood to the percentage of the city population in the neighborhood using the 2024 census numbers. And we found Squaw Mountain, Issaquah Valley, and Old Town were the most overrepresented areas, or they had higher percentages of members than would be expected based on the population, whereas Issaquah Highlands, North Issaquah, and Montreux were the most underrepresented. We also looked at applicant numbers from the past 2 years and found similar, although not identical, trends. The same 3 were the most underrepresented, and the same 3 were the most overrepresented. However, when looking at applicant trends, Squaw Mountain was only 4% overrepresented, whereas Issaquah Valley was 15% more represented. And those numbers are in the appendix as well. One other thing to note here is that about 20% of the members are from outside of the jurisdiction, and so those are not included in this analysis. So the total number of members is a little bit lower than what is true for all boards and commissions, because we're only looking at those who reported living inside of Issaquah in one of those neighborhoods. We also looked at that demographic representation in terms of gender and race and ethnicity. Overall, we found members were relatively representative of the community population, with the exception of those identifying as Asian, which are underrepresented on boards and commissions. You can see these trends are relatively consistent with applicants and members. However, there are some fluctuations in applicants over the years. For example, in 2024, nearly 60% of applicants were female. However, in 2023, only a little over 40% were. So we do see some changes over time that are occurring. Similarly, while looking at boards and commissions as a whole, it's fairly representative. When we looked at specific boards and broke down that representation, we found that it was not consistent. For example, some boards are approximately 75% white, with little representation of other races. All of this should, however, be taken with a grain of salt, as there are significant amounts of missing data. For reporting gender, race, and ethnicity is not a requirement. So we have somewhere between 13 and 19% missing data, which could vastly change our findings if we did have that full data. We did also find that this was reflected in our interviews with members who perceived their boards as fairly representative with some room for improvement. Members also noted additional aspects of diversity, such as socioeconomic status, age, profession, and renters versus homeowners, as important aspects of diversity and places where there wasn't full representation on their boards. We, however, were not able to do an analysis such as this with those aspects of diversity because we did not have that data available. Next up, we are going to talk about recruitment practices, and in terms of perception of folks on the board and what we heard from our interviews with city staff and members of the boards and commissions. Staff also provided us with some documentation, which we reviewed, but this is heavily based on perceptions that were shared on those interviews. One area where perception and actual activities may vary is in the outreach from city staff. While this came up as a perceived gap in some interviews, and in particular, specific postcard outreach was not mentioned, we do know that postcards went out across the city during previous years. Staff also highlighted places where the city works with some local community groups, such as the Circle on Gilman and Y in the Highlands, HOAs, economic development groups, and a presence in various city and HOA newsletters. The perception here is that anyone not part of these existing networks is not being reached as part of the recruitment process. We don't know for sure who recruitment is reaching, since we cannot assess those who did not apply, but there's a perception that it's reaching the same people every time. Finally, there's a perception that materials are not translated widely into languages other than English, which may present barriers to reaching groups that have other primary languages. In terms of our other findings, we looked at why do people join? So very similar to your opening question today, as well as how they found the position and barriers to joining. In terms of why people joined, we found that individuals shared multiple reasons for joining, but by far the two most common were a desire to give back and to connect with community, which was reflected, I think, today during your opening and what all of you shared for your reasons for coming to the Equity Board. In terms of finding the position, overall members found the position either through existing personal connections or when seeking out a way to get more involved in the community. Multiple cited the city newsletter in particular as a place where they first noticed the posting when they were seeking a way to get involved. Finally, members mentioned overall that they had very little hesitation and faced few barriers to joining the board themselves. However, they shared that they perceived others may face hurdles to joining, particularly in terms of time commitment, a perception of the expertise, background, or knowledge needed, lack of clarity around what would be asked of them, and the scope of duties, and a lack of awareness of the board in general. I will now pass it to Carter, and he will share our recommendations based on these findings.
Hello. I will be speaking to the recommendation slides. In our findings, we found a perceived hurdle that people will self-select out due to a lack of experience and a need to increase the visibility of translated materials. We also found that there was an abundance of traditional recruitment methods, such as print advertising, internal hiring / board member referrals, and in-person interviews. We also found the gap in the board and demographics. While current practices attempt to bridge that gap, while working with local community groups and increased presence in newsletters, we find that exploring more non-traditional recruitment methods can improve this recruitment gap. Some actions that could be associated with non-traditional recruitment methods include attending network events, community events and conferences, distributing flyers in common languages at specialty grocery stores, and recruiting through social media. To create a more inclusive recruitment process, reduce the number of interviews needed for the application process, and utilize ongoing partnerships with nonprofit to communicate expectations for serving. By exploring non-traditional methods of recruitment, we believe that these could bridge the current gaps. For our recruitment-related recommendations, we believe that an increase in communication and standardization, the board's process will greatly improve the ability to find solutions. For this, we recommend following a co-creation style meeting process. Co-creation is a powerful tool to enhance brainstorming and can empower board members to contribute. These co-creation meetings can be with the diverse networks that boards have and use to help discover new and creative ways to recruit. In our research and interviews, we found many different types of board roles. One of the most prominent ones we found in Washington suburbs was the use of community engagement. To that end, we recommend increasing community engagement opportunities. This can look like attending and or co-planning community-based events, creating civic academies supporting community-driven policy development, and co-fundraising with community-based organizations. Now that we have discussed the recruitment and representation findings and our current recommendations, we would love to hear some feedback on them.
This is our first gap for any discussion, thoughts, questions. I'm happy to click back to slides.
Do you by chance have like retention data about people? Because I see that you have those who have applied from the previous year. I'm just curious, do you have retention data of how many people stay on the board at all?
We don't have that right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Short answer.
I have a question. As our board started, we were online and we stayed optional. And one of the conversations we had early on in our meetings is the importance to offer online opportunities because we've had members who might not be able to access cars, transportation, childcare, because all of those are limiting factors for people to be able to participate in community events and service like this.
Yeah.
So I have no clue, but do the commissions have optional online meetings, or do they have? Is it required?
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in our second half, but the short answer is yes. Almost everyone else that we talk to tries to provide online or Zoom options, except for maybe some specific meetings throughout the year.
And the other thing I was going to say was, while putting flyers and mailing them is great, I think tapping into social media is better because if you're looking at communities that don't speak the language, receiving a random flyer saying, come join is meaningless. I'm going to throw it out. But if it is through a social network and a conversation where people are like, wait, what is this? And why are you sharing this resource? I think that is better, sharing such opportunities through a more social network rather than what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, please.
I was gonna ask, when you were all doing the assessment or like gathering information about the incentives, were people suggesting what incentives they would like for joining a board? Like, was it, maybe flexibility of, the schedule, or was it like some kind of pay or stipend or what, whatever those reasons might be? Did that come up at all?
Came up a little bit. So my short answer here is in Issaquah specifically, when we asked folks, were there barriers to applying? Most folks said personally, like, we didn't find any barriers. So to me, a barrier could be something like a stipend or, some sort of compensation or other ways of thinking about participation, right? There was a kind of perceived barriers for others, though, piece that came up a lot. So in other cities, everyone has things similar to Issaquah has stipends. Folks sometimes, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but folks have things like childcare, like meals, like online options. So there are a variety of things, but we didn't have anyone specifically. And Jordan and Maria, please tell me if you feel differently. I don't believe we had anyone specifically say, like, this is something that I would look for.
So just to kind of follow up on that. So I know, and Lorna just kind of rattled off a whole list of other possible barriers. And so it might be like a gap in terms of the methodology, but you ask these questions of current board members. And so there's all the folks who decided not to apply for barriers, right? And so I think for us to fully understand that, right, it's like the perceived barriers again. So that's a little bit of the gap in terms of what we know.
Certainly.
Yeah. Just wanted to kind of note that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't know what we can't know because we don't have access to those folks. So I think there's certainly something to be said for, they may have faced this barrier and we have no idea, right? Because they're not here. That's it.
I just had a quick question. So I know you touched briefly on like training. So I believe new board members and board and commission members go through some kind of training as soon as they join. But did you get any takeaways from that?
Yeah. Certainly. And again, we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So I love that you guys are bringing up things that we're going to keep talking about. It means we're on the right page, I think. Yes, board members, there's in Issaquah, there's a little bit of inconsistency around trainings that are done on every board, but folks do receive some sort of, at least like onboarding in some sense. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'll hold on to that question. If we don't answer it, I'll come back to it. Okay.
Do you have a percentage of how many people will intentional search versus existing connections?
I'm not sure. Jordan, do you know that off the top of your head?
I'm just wondering because you have so many coming from old Issaquah where it's a very tight-knit community.
Yeah.
And through word of mouth, it's really going out. And there are some people, even in our board, who came out from intentional searches. So besides that too, I'm wondering how else do people find out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and physical proximity to City Hall.
Yes.
Like even just thinking about, like if you live close to City Hall, you probably think about the activity of the city more than if you live far from City Hall potentially.
Do you also have age?
I don't believe we have age data. Is that correct, Jordan?
That is correct. No.
Because I once remember looking at the data for Issaquah and we have a lot of older senior population. And my question is, how many of the people who are participating are in a certain age bracket? And so are we missing? I mean, we have our youth voices, but do we have that 20-something-year-old age range, or are most boards primarily the?
Yeah, and I think part of the discussion that we will want to have with you and move to you, always thinking about, within the application process, folks are asked to answer a series of demographic questions. Like, is there anything else that we want to find out, like age, that we feel is really important? So I think that's a good question.
Just to add to that, we did have age come up quite frequently during interviews as a place where maybe there wasn't great representation on boards, and specifically that those younger voices might be missing.
Yeah, so there's a sense of it, we just don't have the numbers. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could take a pause to see if Heather or Anisha on the Teams meeting have any, questions or comments, and to definitely invite you to raise your hand, use the raise hand feature so we can make sure.
I don't really have a question, just a comment. I think this is fascinating data that's been acquired. Is this something that is shared with the community?
Yeah, so I think I can maybe take that one. Yeah. So this is the first of 2 meetings that we're coming to with Equity Board. We'll be back for your June meeting. And again, present this data in a public meeting. So it'll be part of the public record. We also, as part of our contracting with the Evans School, get a final report out on a lot of this, a nice glossy kind of item that'll be shared with other boards and commissions. And I think that's part of this next question of how do we share, how do we implement? So it's available to the public, but I obviously acknowledge that you wouldn't know to look for it unless you're in this room. So.
And so just one other question I thought I had related to the recommendations, and there was one around kind of, it's not the word you all use, but like a targeted recruitment strategy. Like, so for me, how I'm hearing that is like, if we know who our current membership is, and we know there's gaps in representation, is part of the next step to explore the legality of like doing more targeted recruitment to be able to intentionally close those gaps? Or
yeah, I think it probably goes hand in hand with this question of what other data do we need to know who we need to reach out to. I think those two have a sequencing to them, but there is a question of that, and that's something that we've been talking about with our city clerks who run a lot of that process. So
yeah, and essentially it comes out when I've talked to other folks, other cities, that comes out more in, what like larger communities do we really want to advertise this to? Who do we really want to start building bridges with? So it becomes more of kind of a larger push to involve that community rather than more like specific targeting. That's how I might think about addressing that. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments on this section?
So I'm not sure who was saying that, I think it was Jordan, about age. Just maybe it's not a question, just something to keep in mind. Is there a way to like kind of create a comparison, I guess, of the boards or individuals who are on boards who are saying there's not enough youth representation, comparing that to the boards that offer youth representative positions? Because I'm not sure, not all boards offer youth representatives. Is that right?
That's correct. That is correct, yeah.
Yeah.
This board, the environmental board,
Transportation.
and I want to say transportation advisory board.
Yeah. So maybe making a comparison on that way, maybe get more change, getting more youth representative positions.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. All right, then I'm gonna pass it over to Maria. Take us into our next section.
Yeah, great discussion, and really exciting to hear a lot of themes that have been coming up throughout also this section of the presentation. So I think it'll be interesting to continue and hear a little bit more about the experiences and inclusion practices that came up from our findings as we interviewed the City of Issaquah Board and Commission members. So that's really the focus of this second portion of the presentation, is more when somebody's on a board, what is that experience and how do they perceive inclusion throughout that process as well. So we'll start by grounding ourselves a little bit in some of the lit review. So our lit review helped us identify really some of the connections between inclusion and experience on equity. So one of the things, of course, is ensuring everyone feels welcome, feels accepted and valued, is kind of that bottom line of building an inclusive and equitable environment. So there are a few different ways that this can happen. And I'll say that many of these things, I think, are practices that are already in place to a certain degree within the City of Issaquah's board and commissions. So some of these might be just refreshers, but also just helpful to kind of help ground ourselves as we go through the findings and then the recommendations, kind of following that same format as the earlier section. So I won't go in detail on each of these findings, but the first one focuses in on co-creation. So we already heard the value of co-creation when it came to recruitment. Very similarly, co-creation really creates that buy-in from everybody and allows for dialogue and helps to uncover any disparities or gaps that might exist across the board. So really an opportunity for that co-ownership and building of community together. Something I think came up quite a bit was around equity training. And this came up both in the context, of course, of the interviews and I know in just this discussion just prior. So supporting ongoing equity trainings for all board members is really a recommendation that came out in the findings from the lit review. This can help align board members' understanding and commitment to equity. And I think it really establishes a starting point for everybody to come together, to have shared definitions, to have the same sort of context to be able to work off of. And then by repeating and coming back to the material, there's opportunities to call in findings in different times and places throughout the process. Next up, we have shared governance practices. So a little bit more of that like co-design, co-development here. So really just trying to capture the interests of as many participants as possible. I think we heard a little bit in the icebreaker, the importance of lived experience and representation. So those sort of factors also come into influencing how boards can operate. Next, we have leading to board member retention. So a feeling of inclusion, a feeling of belonging leads to that longevity of so many board members and the great experiences that were shared as part of the interviews, or many great experiences that were shared as part of the interviews. And this is really about, feeling empowered to step in, feeling a sense of ownership and an engagement throughout this whole process of being a board or commission member. And then lastly, establishing clear board member roles and responsibilities can also just create more clarity and helping everybody understand, how to best contribute to the broader kind of collective environment that we're building here. So moving forward into the interview findings, we found that board members' perceptions of inclusion really aligned with a lot of those findings. So One thing was this feeling of being supported, so a feeling of inclusion that is started by the staff liaisons, that yields or translates into greater comfort speaking up in meetings, those icebreakers. I think having that place to really start that dialogue and ensure that everybody's voice is brought in is also something that was brought up as a finding, or brought up in a lot of the interviews, so a finding as well. We also heard, though, on the other end, so for newer members, and it's great to hear so many of the new members already sharing in this meeting alone, but for newer members, there is a little bit of a kind of transition to feel more comfortable, right? There's not only maybe the technical learning curve of the content that's at hand, but there's also kind of that dual nature of trying to understand what it means to actually be a board and commission member. Fortunately, over time, new members had a tendency to feel a lot more comfortable, and things like mentoring, the one-on-ones that some of the chairs were offering were ways that newer interviewees had shared to help support them in that process as well. And then lastly, we have on this slide, the overarching desire to see increased overall communication. So I know there's so much information that you all cover in these board meetings, but just kind of that refresher around, how the information is being relayed and kind of the feedback loops between particularly the recommendations that the boards are making, and then the information that might land in the hands of the council. So that was a particular kind of feedback loop that was called out as perhaps an opportunity to continue to enhance kind of the findings of what the takeaways were. Moving to the next slide, just a few additional findings that our interviews revealed. So equity discussions that were happening in boards were often driven by individuals, so individual board members, and sometimes the chairs or the staff liaisons kind of taking more of those core roles. So that was one thing that we saw. Another one was that equity trainings are not always consistent in terms of the content, the cadence, the quality, the applicability to policy areas. And then not everybody recalled having an equity training. But for those that did, they spoke highly of it as well. And then moving forward, we had sense of community. So I think this is kind of that reoccurring sense of inclusion, a sense of belonging that helps support this ongoing engagement. So things like engaging outside in more social spaces, like going out to eat, which I believe you all are doing after this meeting, events at like the Pickering Barn, just places for more casual conversation where things that help support board members' feeling of inclusion and belonging. And then lastly, accommodations. I think this also came up earlier in one of the questions or comments. So opportunities to continue to remind folks around things like the stipend, that it exists, how to access it, the opportunities for potentially translating materials or knowing when things could or could not be translated or what the process was to even bring that up. So just getting a little bit greater clarity around some of those accommodations would also be appreciated. So those were just some highlights. There are plenty of other recommendations or findings, that we'll overview in the report. But with that, I want to hand it over to Carter, who can then review some of the recommendations that we have for this section.
Thank you, Maria. Hello again. Due to the gap we found about communication transparency between the city and the boards and commissions, we wanted to reduce this gap, so we recommend creating mechanisms to report back. It can look like starting each meeting with a segment of reporting feedback from the city. This loop will help increase communications, transparency, accountability, and engagement, as members will be more aware of how their contributions are being used by the city. We also found that the current training practices on the boards and commissions could greatly benefit from improvement. We recommend establishing a standardized equity training process as part of the onboarding for equity members. and all members. That includes the following: establishing a shared language by defining key equity-related terms, aligning and introducing shared equity values for the board to hold, providing an understanding of local disparities, ensuring clarity on roles and responsibilities, using case studies relevant to the board scope, and explaining potential biases. And then additionally, offering additional resources for continued growth. Additionally, we recommend taking this training a bit further by establishing equity trainings for specific policy areas. This would give members the tools needed to be more effective and sensitive to equity concerns within the community. To continue, we found that there's also challenges in collaboration across the boards, and to help bridge these gaps, we recommend creating more spaces for collaboration. These opportunities would be for all boards to come together, building a deeper repertoire between them. Some potential community events could include potlucks, outdoor movie screenings, and retreats. The purpose is to bring different boards together to build a stronger community. Lastly, we see that there's inconsistencies across the current onboarding practices. We found that newer members are less likely to speak up. To find solutions for these two things, we recommend standardizing the current onboarding process and adding additional onboarding options. These options can look like one-on-one board onboarding with staff, board buddies, or any other program to really improve the onboarding process. We believe this will help build relationships and create a more inclusive environment. And with all that said, now that we discussed inclusion and equity findings and our current recommendations on those, we would love to hear your feedback about them.
So again, any thoughts, comments, questions? I don't know if we got to your point about trainings that you were thinking about, equity training. Okay.
Were there any thoughts about the city website? Like accessibility, ease of use, etc.
Yes. We talked about that a bit, and I was actually, we're considering some additional recommendation options that do include making the website more accessible for all members of the community.
Is that something that, in terms of accessibility, are you thinking about usability, language, like what comes to mind for you?
More usability, like easier way to get to places on the site. I tried to get a few places and it was a little bit of a runaround and I couldn't always find what I was looking for.
Yes.
So I still have questions that I'll probably ask you about, but
Bring them my way.
Certainly, yes. I mean, government websites are known for their usability, I believe.
I'm thinking like it could lead to frustrations and stuff and like.
Absolutely.
I mean, more than one of you struggled to submit your application. And had to submit a separate document. So, you know, there's both the bigger accessibility issues and then there's like the can you submit your application for a board position without getting an error screen. That's a thing too that came up this round.
Totally. And again, you know, to the question of we don't know what we don't know, folks who couldn't access, who couldn't get there, right? Who couldn't submit their applications. But I think that, yeah, it's absolutely a point to consider. Yeah.
In talking to any of the board and commission members, did you talk to anyone who left within a year?
I think we only spoke to current board members. So no is the short answer.
Because I think one of the questions I'm wondering is why people leave.
Of course.
And doing exit surveys, because I love all of the work you've done and information you've gotten, but I'm also wondering why some people leave.
Absolutely.
What were barriers? And I know when you were doing the recruitment, I was asking a lot about inclusion. Now I feel like you did the inclusion and I'm looking at recruitment.
No, it's all linked, so I appreciate it.
Because I think my question is, as people are coming in, what are some strategies and some things in place? Like, what are we thinking to put in place to make sure they feel welcome to even step into the running, right? Because you just said we don't know, and all of this is like what to do once they're in the door.
Certainly.
But how do we get them even in the parking lot?
Yeah.
And so we can do chats with them at that point. To meet with them. So
Yeah.
I think you did have doing community engagement. You're gonna share that. Because a one-on-one and heavy recruiting or be available, I think is really important because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, there's this kind of spectrum of entrance, like where can we reach out to people? And so, or if we focus on this area where we don't have information, but again, as you said, there's all these other factors as well. So thinking about where can you grow longer term relationships with communities, and it kind of gets at that broader bridge building.
And that's why I was kind of looking at the retention data, because I'm like, how long does someone stay on? And if you have every year, you're refreshing your list and everyone's new, then yeah, what is the look back of the reasoning, right?
Absolutely.
I would also recommend maybe like instead of, so there's like exit surveys are great, also stay interviews as people are already on the board, continuously check in with their onboarding buddies and be like, what inspires you? What's keeping you going on here? What could be better? To kind of be a little bit more proactive.
Yeah. About that.
I think adding on to both their points, the newest board members like us, like what we went through to kind of apply and get through it. Like, I mean, I can tell you the struggles I had to do it. So, I mean, that's like information that is of the people who are here, who are like almost not here.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think just one more piece is, some of the things that we're bringing in are of the inclusion piece is what we heard anecdotally from other cities and liaisons of why wasn't necessarily specific reasons, but why they thought folks might be leaving. And a lot of it came down to some of the structure pieces we talked about. So what is someone's expectation of being on the board? What do they believe can and can't get done? And do those things match to what the city is looking for, right? The other piece of it is around some of what we already talked about around the barriers of it's just too much of a time commitment. But it's really often a combination. It's a time commitment and I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. It's less one or the other. It's not just, it's too much time. I also like don't feel quite right, or I don't feel quite like I know what I'm doing. So that's all anecdotal, but a little bit of information.
Yeah, and in terms of the onboarding training, I know the equity board has board buddies, and when I first joined, that was really helpful because I got to know more. I got to speak to someone on the board who told me more about the equity board than just a little description on the city website, which was really helpful. And also kind of going back, I know we talked about how trying to get more members that aren't just recommended for the board. During interviews, did you get any feedback from current members on how to reach out to people who aren't necessarily in any Issaquah city boards yet or are new to the community? I was wondering any different other than flyers and social media, but
yeah. And I'll let Maria or Jordan jump in, but I think the big piece was really kind of what we already talked about of building bridges with various nonprofit organizations and other folks that can help kind of broaden that funnel for recruitment. Jordan, Maria, anything you'd add there of things you heard?
I think one other thing was just the general awareness of boards and commissions. And interestingly, the youth board is one that is out in the community a lot and doing a lot, and so many people, and you two youth advisory members can speak to this better than I can, but is getting involved with youth. But it seemed like when we were talking to youth members, we did the triathlon and had no idea it was connected to the boards and commissions. So just capitalizing on things that are already happening and saying this is part of this larger thing and here's how you could get more involved in it, and thinking about other events that boards and commissions are already at and have a presence at to help build that community awareness was another thing that came up.
Thanks, Jordan.
One thing I'm thinking about in terms of tactically implementing the recommendations that are laid out. So the way the findings and recommendations are presented, it's kind of treating all of the boards and commissions as a single unit, when we all have very different practices and bylaws and ground rules. And so when I saw some of the recommended actions, I feel like the equity board is doing a number of them. And so for part of me, and I think in terms of turning recommendations to actions, it might be helpful to think about whether you can maybe show what those gaps are by the specific boards and commissions, because otherwise, I think you'll have board members, staff liaisons trying to piece it apart and figure out, okay, what is more actionable for our board or commission? And then I'm also thinking about a next step is, I know Tisha's kind of involved at kind of the overarching layer. It might be thinking about what is standard governance. So I know you all talked about like standardizing certain elements, but like, across the board, what are some standard practices, for all boards and commissions? And where should that variation be allowed to happen to like bubble up, innovative ideas, better ideas. But I think it would save a lot of time and energy if the known best practices are just standard across boards and commissions. So that might be helpful in terms of moving forward. Like what is something that all boards and commissions need to do? What is the gap for specific boards and commissions? And then, then I think with like the boards and the staff liaisons, there could be some specific action plans for each one about which ones to move forward with. Because I think, the highest priority for the city, it kind of depends on which board or commission you're on. So
I think building on to PT and the second question, I know you guys were talking about how there's different equity trainings for different boards. I would say, at least for me, that stood out to me the most. If you have inconsistencies in what people's understanding of equity is, what they think they should do, that's going to have an impact on their policies, how they interact with other boards, and hence have an impact on the community in some way, either positive or negative. And I think that's something that we should address.
The one thing I also want to say is in creating a board and being very mindful who's already on the board and whose voice is being heard and whose voice is missing. Because I know that sometimes even in equity boards like ours, that can become an issue. So constantly being mindful and what is in writing, as you're saying, we need to be more mindful and things need to be written. So I don't think even we have it in writing that we are looking for representation to represent our community. And so what does that, you showed us, that was one of the first data slides you showed, Hispanic, Black, and all of that. But how do we ensure that there's good representation? And so when people are applying, what is their role? So for example, in like government, you have Congress people have to be from certain number from each state. So in coming into a board, do you have some kind of a representation location or some kind of identity that someone needs to have to be part of that board so that you can ensure voice and representation?
It's a great question. And it's one I'll tell you every board struggles with and every city struggles with. And so you've really hit upon something that it's like a gnarly thing to work out. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, I'm hearing from you all. I know you interviewed folks in other jurisdictions, and overall, how did we compare to what you learned across?
Yeah. And I think we try to highlight some of it throughout this, but to kind of summarize it in full, I would say that overall, Issaquah is doing like a pretty good job, like in comparison. Again, most of our data is anecdotal, but overall pretty good. I think what we've seen is, Issaquah has a growth mindset, and other cities are working on similar things. Obviously, there's always room to grow, but kind of a similar boat. We've seen less consistency across boards to the point you were talking about around operations, so trainings, guidance liaisons, recruitment. Other boards have worked a little bit more in terms of their clarity and consistency in those areas. Similarly, staff, I think I mentioned this already, but staff on other boards mentioned clear policy and procedure is a big part of retention. And so getting some of those stricter and more standardized governance practices in place could be really helpful. Centralized place for trainings and resources, and opportunities for overlap. So those are kind of our big takeaways in comparison. And then a lot of the different actions and recommendations we brought in are all things we got from speaking with other cities. So it's things other folks are actively trying to use to combat some of those gaps. So we'll have a lot more on that in our specific paper once we've done more.
I had one question. One short on time, but just, I wanted to revisit the representation chart that you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we've been talking about this for like the last 30 minutes, so I don't really have it well formed.
You want the geography or the demographics?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, if we were to apply an equity lens on this, I'm wondering if trying to have representation at parity with the population is one way to look at it, but really having representation that tries to battle the inequities that exist. In other words, like having greater representation for communities that are facing larger inequities would seem appropriate. So, for example, let's just say 60% white, maybe they're only suffering from 30% of the inequities that we see in our community. Maybe we need 30% representation there, but perhaps, 20% from Blacks, even though they're only 4% of the community. So I'm just wondering, like, how would we apply that equity lens on this? What have you found in your research, and what do we think as a board on, do these bars need to match up, or actually they need to be biased towards the inequities that exist?
They're overrepresenting
Exactly.
big groups that are furthest from opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah, it's a great point. I don't know that we have any specific, there's no specific research on exact makeups. I think it's what we've really seen is you need a combination of different people, and you need practices that back up that representation. I don't necessarily have specific numbers for you, but I think there is something to be said for bringing in that idea of, do you want parity, or do you need to think about whose voices have traditionally not been heard? Yeah, I would love everyone's ideas.
Is it possible to do your demographic representation based on board members and commissions as well?
I think we can.
Also clarity on city population, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's a chart in the back that breaks this down by board and commission, like you can see the arts commission, the equity board, all these different characteristics.
I think I missed it, sorry.
No, you're good. It was like,
I
have it by year. I don't have it by specific.
Okay. It's floated around, so we'll add it in the next.
Because I was looking for data like that, like for the economic committee, what was the representation? Because I know this committee is very diverse, but I wondered about some of the other committees, and in that work, when they're doing that work, what is the intention? And who are they trying to make sure their voices in the community that they're serving? And so how we, and
yeah, I think we have that.
Should be done.
Is unknown like other, or is it like they didn't answer?
The latter.
Okay.
Would it also be possible to add the years? So the people who are on the board, the years that they lived in Issaquah as well, because I know that was a question on the application of how many years did you live here?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I don't know that we have that data for all of them at the moment. Jordan, I might be wrong, but I don't think we have data for everyone on years lived in Issaquah.
I have not seen that data, but Jillian or Andrea, let us know if you have it, and I'd be happy to play around with it.
Really exists.
Does.
Sorry, can I follow up? So since unknown is people who didn't answer, is there an other?
So I don't believe so. All the demographic data is optional for the most part. So, I don't know. Jordan did all of our analysis.
Yeah.
I don't believe other was an option.
I just know personal experience, they tell Middle Eastern people to put white, which is why sometimes it's like a little bit like, but it's not. So it's kind of like a weird.
Absolutely. This is all mapped to what's on census data, right?
Which is the census does that. Okay.
So that's why these are specific categories, because we're trying to, because unfortunately to collect data and compare it, we have to relate it to what's there.
No, I think.
I
think
think
about it.
it's a great point though. Like it is not necessarily capturing everything because we're trying to map it to this existing data set. Yeah.
And your data source is the application form that board members use in their application. Yeah. Okay. So I know we're winding down time. Dale, don't give me this.
Ray already came over here to ask where all of you were, so that's why this is a step down.
So I think Lorna has one more question. I also wanted to check really quickly to see if Heather had a question. on the team? No. Oh, okay, that's cool. So Lorna,
I just want to wonder, do you have socioeconomic data and LGBTQ data as part of this? Because I'm wondering again, some commissions we might want to make sure some of the, what is diversity and what, who's being represented? And so I'm wondering about that for some.
Yeah, again, not currently, but again, part of this, I think the next step for the city will be like, what kinds of things do we want to think about now, including if those things are what we want to capture.
on the application form or demographic questions. Yeah. Okay, well, and then you wanna wind us down with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very glad to get your feedback. We're also getting feedback from the internal equity team, which is a group of staff members who are engaged in this work as well, and the city clerks and communications who also touch a lot of this recruitment and governance pieces of it. So we'll get their recommendations incorporated into the final report. Come back to you in June with any changes. And I know we started to touch on the highest priority for these recommendations, but I think we can maybe dig into that question a little bit further at that June meeting and identify some of those gaps. We already noted a lot of the data gaps, making sure there aren't any like recommendation gaps that are missing as well. So that's our plan, and we'll talk more about implementation in June as well. So.
I want to say thank you really quick to everyone for being here, for your questions, for listening to our very long presentation. It really helps us and get some perspective and come up with some next steps. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's a great report. And I think the energy in the room speaks to like folks are thinking about like how to put this stuff into practice. So it's been great work. And then Jillian, you'll be filling in for Dale at the next meeting as well.
Yeah, so I'll be with you guys through the summer, which I'm really excited about. And I know I'm between you all and some social time, so let's chat over at uni if you're curious about me or want to see a picture of my
Okay, so that is the other business. And okay, so then I think with that, we are adjourning. So it's 7:34 and the May meeting of the Equity Board is now adjourned. And we'll see all of you who have time and